Good afternoon and welcome to the Word Out West. You know what time it is. It's Mondays at 5 and we are here. So, to my right, our special guest here is Michael Romaine, the editor of Austin Weekly and the publisher of the Village Free Press. And to my next right is
Maggie, and I'm at Healthcare Alternative Systems.
Today, we are talking with Michael about the media coverage around the opioid crisis. And because Michael is the editor of one of Austin's longest standing newspapers. Wow, almost 40 years, Michael. Austin Weekly has been around for almost 40 years, longer than a lot of us have been alive. That's pretty impressive. We'll be talking about the media coverage around the opioid crisis and Michael's perception of that coverage. And let's get right to it. Sounds good?
Yep.
Glad to have you here, Michael.
Thank you.
All right, can you share with our audience more about you and your two publications, Austin Weekly and Village Free Press?
Yeah, so Austin Weekly News, like you said, has been around for close to 40 years. I've been editor since 2015. I want to get this right.
Nice.
So going on 5 years.
Cool.
We cover Austin, North Lawndale, West Garfield Park, a little bit of East Garfield Park.
Okay.
We circulate about 10,000 copies a week
Wow.
in that area at schools, libraries, churches, gas stations.
Wow. Gas stations. You can get
stations.
your news at the gas station.
I don't know which one, but
That's good
we
stuff.
do get them at small businesses. They're all free. We also have a website, austinweeklynews.com.
Yeah, I check that out quite
I
frequently.
share
Yeah.
a lot of those articles on my Facebook often.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you'll be hopefully sharing more. We just partnered with Block Club Chicago.
That's exciting.
That's our guys.
I love
Black Club Chicago. Special shout out. Pascal,
Yeah.
thank you for writing about us. That's
Yeah, we're going to
wonderful.
be doing a joint branded newsletter,
That's
neighborhood
awesome.
newsletter that will just flood you with West Side news.
Wonderful.
2 days a week, I believe. It's still
I
kind
love
of in
it.
the making, but we're looking forward to working with Pascal Sabino,
That's our guy.
their West Side
Yeah.
beat reporter.
Yeah.
He does great work.
He does great work.
Yeah, we actually got 2 pieces from him in this week's print paper. So
Incredible.
going forward, we'll have more stuff.
Yeah.
Look at that coming together.
It's
I
very
love
cool.
it.
Yeah.
Very nice. What's up, Maggie?
Yeah, so Michael, why is media coverage or just media in general so important in communities like Austin and West Garfield Park and all of these other communities?
Great question.
Yeah, well, it's important because I don't quite know how to stress the importance without, telling you what the situation is
Yeah.
with newspapers and, with communities that don't have outlets.
Sure.
So, I tend to think of local news as a community builder. It really lets people know, it shows the community to itself. And if you don't have a local media, not just a local media, but a vibrant local media that is devoted to consistently reporting
Yeah.
local issues to the public, not just crime, but the whole gamut of life in a particular area, it's really hard to kind of see, to get the full breadth of what a community is,
Yeah.
even to residents who live in a community. So it's really, really important.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a way to celebrate a community or like not just talk about crime that's happening, but to celebrate like a community that's very close and to
Absolutely.
talk about what's going on in that community, what benefits the community, what does the community need.
Yeah, and it holds powerful people
Yeah.
accountable too.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise,
That's
they can do whatever they want.
powerful people and powerful situations like the opioid crisis. And so, Michael, as we mentioned to you, our show is aimed toward millennials. All right. And so we did that. And our goal is to penetrate that audience because we realize that we are a powerful audience. And because of the way that we do media in our generation, I think that we have the power really to create a platform for people to combat this crisis. So, what are your thoughts on the way that local media is covering the opioid crisis? Also, what are your thoughts on the way that national media is covering the opioid crisis?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, nationally in general, and I was just looking at some studies not too long ago, actually today.
Yeah.
And one of the things I came across was this. There are a few like myths that are related to opioid, just to the opioid epidemic in particular.
Yeah.
One is that it's a white epidemic,
Yeah.
Let's
which
talk about that.
tends to sort of exclude black victims
Sure.
of overdoses and black people who are addicted. So that's the biggest myth. I mean, even with when people want to sort of, I guess, differentiate between how the media covered the crack epidemic of the 80s and the 90s and this recent opioid epidemic, what gets lost in that conversation is the fact that black people are part of both.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just and this most recent epidemic, the media conversation has been much different than the crack epidemic. So
In what ways?
Yeah, well, so people are. So, for instance, I was looking at this New York Times article. I think it was published last year by a public health graduate student who wrote a column, and he was pointing out how, for instance, just the language that is used to describe victims
Interesting.
who are white and who are written about by media outlets now is much more compassionate,
And like angelic.
much more
almost.
humane.
Really?
It incorporates, their background.
Yeah.
It's more of a focus on systemic factors like big pharmaceutical companies that have helped contribute to the epidemic. If you went back and read national media articles about the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s, the blame was sort of centered on African Americans.
The narrative has changed.
The narrative has changed. And the important thing is that on the flip side, during the crack epidemic, black people weren't the only people who were dying
No.
of crack overdose.
No.
We heard so much of
We
that.
heard so much of it, and we were centered in a media conversation that was more focused on crime and punishment
Yes.
as opposed to what it is today. White people are centered in this current media conversation about the current opioid epidemic in a way that is much different. It's much, the victims are considered people.
Yeah.
Whereas before they weren't. So I think even considering that distinction, we need to still understand that opioid overdose victims, people who are addicted, they are black and white. They're not just white.
Yeah.
Sure.
But unfortunately, the black victims, their stories don't really get centered in the media conversation about the current opioid epidemic.
No, they don't. And it's kind of like, we already know that people have been dying from heroin and opioids for years.
Sure.
This isn't a new thing.
Absolutely.
But, we start hearing about it when white people are dying in the suburbs
interesting.
from prescription pills. Now it's a big epidemic. Now it's a problem. Now we need to be compassionate towards these people that are using drugs. And what we've been doing this for how long? Like, this has been going on. Why the sudden change? Why the sudden, let's be compassionate towards people?
Why
It's
the
not,
change in
it's a completely different narrative, and it's not fair, and it's almost misguiding the information. It's not the real information.
I like this. So let's dig into this. So are you someone out there who've witnessed the change of narrative in the national drug coverage between the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s
Yeah.
versus the opioid epidemic now? You want to speak to that? Give us a call, 312-738-1060. We'd love to hear from you. So Michael, does that then make things difficult to cover and write about? Is it difficult to then appeal to an audience and educate them because some of them are maybe not interested because of the color factors or?
No, our audience is people on the west side. It may be it's
Ours
difficult. Yeah, if you consider yourself in competition with larger outlets that often distort the narrative or the reality, then it can be difficult. But we don't see ourselves in competition with large mainstream outlets. Our main concern is is making sure that we're informing the people who live on the West Side, our readership. And so I guess that makes how we approach the news different than, say, other outlets. And so, one example is a story that I think we wrote in. It was in 2018, yeah, and it was called "The Sanctuary on Madison Street." So I told you when we were discussing this before, offline, that we don't have the resources to cover the opioid epidemic on the West Side extensively.
Yeah.
But our job, and we do a relatively good job of covering neighborhood issues, period.
For sure.
Stuff that just happens on a day-to-day basis. Organizations that will never get coverage,
Yeah.
In the Tribune or the Sun-Times or some other publications. And by way of us just covering what happens on the West Side every single day, we sort of cover the issue on the back end. So we did this story about the Triage Center on Madison Street,
Okay.
which is jointly operated by Habilitative. It's a nonprofit wellness organization,
Okay.
and another major organization on the West Side. I can't think of the name right now. But this is a facility that takes in. So in the past, say for instance somebody overdosed from experienced a heroin overdose.
Yeah.
Typically, that person is either taken to the emergency room, or in some cases, they may be taken to jail.
Yes.
Yeah,
Depending on the circumstances.
True.
So what the Triage Center does is it's basically an intake center that encourages ambulances to come there. It's a 24/7 treatment center. If people are dealing with overdose situations and it's an emergency situation, they're encouraged to bring those people there. They'll get treated there, and the center, the facility is beautiful. They do
Wow.
yoga. I mean, it's not just for emergency situations.
Oh, sure.
It's for everyday people.
That's amazing.
And they have a whole range of wellness programs and classes that aren't just for crisis situations.
Okay.
They're for everyday life. And so we covered that when it opened. And us covering that story is a way of it's a way of shedding light and attention on the opioid epidemic that's not centered in crisis or deficiency.
That is beautiful,
reporting.
yes. It's letting your neighborhood know, hey, there's these resources here. Hey guys, it's not all bad. People
Right.
aren't all dying. There's help. There's hope. Like there's a nonprofit at this corner. Like come check us out.
That's pretty
How else would these people know that that's there without kind of other people in the community kind of being like, hey, here's this information, take
Right.
it.
And the story wasn't just about, the fact that this is a place where heroin addicts get
Right.
dropped off.
Yeah.
This is a nice, beautiful space on Madison Street that
Nice.
is for a whole range of purposes, and it contributes to the well-being of the entire community.
Yeah.
Michael, how do people out west get their news typically?
That's a great question. I haven't conducted any independent research into that. I mean, obviously, so I can just off the top of my head, I can kind of tell you what news sources are there that I know of. And so obviously there's us, Austin Weekly News. There's Austin Voice. There's,
Oh yeah, The Voice.
Yeah, and then outside of that, there's the Tribe.
Right.
Free Spirit Media, their website, The Shy, The Real Shy. There are shows like you guys on television and on the internet. Obviously, there are the bigger papers, the Sun-Times, the Tribune, and then there's local TV.
Right.
I may be missing a few.
How do you get your news?
My news diet is not the same as the average person. on the
I
West
bet.
Side.
I can only imagine.
I bet.
I get like lots of, but it's as a news, to be a healthy news consumer. Nowadays, it's really important to go after news that is not just the obvious, because
Yes.
you'll
Oh,
get.
wow. Looks like we have a caller.
Oh wow.
Sorry to cut you off,
Oh
Michael.
no, that's a good thing.
Oh, man. Hey, caller.
Hey, I was just calling in because, hi, Michael Roman, it's Sandra
Hey,
Harrison. I'm
Sandra, how
getting
Hi,
you
my
doing?
Sandra.
Hey, I just had a question. You talked about really getting to the truth of news and making sure that the news was covered from a perspective that is honest. And it brings me to mind a, a task force member a couple of meetings ago that brought up a really interesting issue about how some of the victims were being treated in very negative ways on the street. And I was wondering if you come up against that in your work and how you find reporting on that.
Reporting on victims.
Or just the way that they are being treated sometimes in negative ways.
Great
One of the things that
question.
I heard at our former task force meeting is that sometimes in engagement, it wasn't always the most positive encounter. You had police who were kind of encountering a victim and treating them in a less than humane way, and also the same behavior as they walked into hospitals or trying to even go into pharmacies to pick up their medication.
Great question, Sandra. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, we encounter that type of victimization, even if it's not directly related to the opioid epidemic,
Yeah.
quite often. I was directly involved in something like that 3 years ago, I want to say, when I was out conducting an interview and a shooting took place.
Wow.
Just right outside of, it was a store on, it's no longer there, on Corcoran and Central.
Oh, out west. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, right by the Green Line. It was a drive-by shooting, and there was actually there were two Northwestern journalism students who were shot on me that day. Me and a staff photographer,
Oh, wow.
and they were in the grocery store. Luckily, the windows were pretty sturdy, so the bullets didn't come into the store. But moments after that happened, I walk out and then I see this kid on the ground who's literally taking his last breaths.
My
And
goodness.
so, like 3 minutes after that, the police come on the scene, and they treated the people who witnessed the shooting or who were just party to the shooting, traumatized ourselves. They
Yeah.
treated us like suspects, and they were cursing at us, shoving us away. You would think that they'd want to ask
Information.
us about what happened.
Yeah.
You
Did you see
think?
the license plate perhaps or anything?
Not so
No,
much.
yeah,
Oh
no,
my gosh.
Wow.
they got into they were manhandling our photographer who's Hispanic. It was we were victimized all over again.
Yeah.
And that's how the authorities handle people on the West Side. Period. And in just a variety of circumstances, I can only imagine what it is for people who have to encounter emergency responders
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
more frequently in other contexts and situations. So it happens quite often. So being a party to it, it was difficult for me to write the story too, but I
I'm
did.
Yeah.
sure.
And at a news conference the next day that was convened by two aldermen, Talaferro, Mitz, a Cook County commissioner at the time, Danny Davis was there. They stood outside, feet away from where the kid died. And I thought it was my responsibility to mention to the aldermen and to the local officials that were convened about my experience with the police.
Yes.
And that's something that they need to address. I don't know what they did since then,
Yeah.
and I don't know whether or not that conversation and that issue that I brought up to the aldermen, if they eventually met with the police. I don't know if they brought that up to them directly, but that's something that needs to be top of mind all the time, because we think of we look at when you were talking about news consumption.
Right.
And when you are used to a steady diet of breaking news from the Tribune or the Sun-Times, not to deride these outlets
Oh,
in
yeah.
particular, but if you're just used to a typical conventional breaking news diet of somebody got shot or somebody got killed, somebody overdosed, or somebody got arrested
Yeah.
because they were selling heroin or conspired to sell heroin, it usually it masks the deeper issues related to these problems.
Yes.
Which is that, victims are not just the people who get shot. Victims are the kid who saw the shooting. Victims aren't just the people who overdose, but they
Yeah.
are also relatives of those who overdosed.
Yeah.
And it's these people, this collateral damage is a term that they use in the military, right? Of these instances of violence that don't really get any attention. So, there's, you read the article, the breaking news article, and then the next day there's another breaking news article about a totally different crisis situation.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no coming back to the situation that happened the day before.
Yeah.
So I think the way that, to Sandra's point, to her question, the way that we treat everybody holistically who is party to trauma is really important, and that's something that needs to be grounded in good neighborhood reporting.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
So, Michael, the mission of this show is to educate people out west, specifically millennials, but anyone who's watching, to educate people and make sure that people are staying in the news and they're reading your papers in Block Club Chicago and they're watching this show and they're learning. And we realize that part of our generation, one of the challenges is to just get people to go beyond the internet, actually read, actually pick up newspapers. Can you, in our last few minutes, encourage our audience to do those things? Because all the answers aren't on Facebook, people, unfortunately. All of the answers aren't here on CAN TV. We have to pick up books. We have to pick up papers. We have to tune in to our local journalists. We have to watch national news on this. It's impactful. So can you please encourage our out west siders to get more engaged in local news?
Please read the news.
Please read the newspaper.
Please read the
Newspaper.
newspaper. I don't know how else to put it. Read the newspaper. Reading is still a skill that you need for life and for your career, whatever that may be. So just read to get a job, if nothing else.
If nothing else. And learn how the narrative is changing. And feel free to ask questions about that. And the more you read, the more you have the right to ask questions.
That is true.
And then the more you learn, the more you want to know. Look at us sounding like NBC. The more you know. But I think it's very important that as millennials out west specifically, that we suck in all of the news from Austin Weekly and that we take advantage of our weekly papers and Village Free Press and everything else out there that is looking to educate us. So we thank you for being on the show today,
No,
Michael.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It was a
I
pleasure.
believe that
Appreciate it.
more than anything, and I am definitely being biased as another Chicago journalist, but more than anything, the news is what keeps us informed and it's what puts us ahead of obstacles in our communities. And I very much so appreciate what you're doing in Austin. I always have. And if people are looking for you, Michael, how can they then find you? Not your glasses, but you.
Yeah, no, they can find me at, if you can read my handwriting.
Absolutely. Go for it.
AustinWeeklyNews.com is Austin Weekly News' website. bfpress.news, which is a newspaper that I publish in the suburbs, west suburbs, Maywood in particular.
So,
And they can email me at michael@austinweeklynews.com.
wonderful. Or you can find us right here at CAN TV every Monday at 5. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We appreciate it, and we will see you next Monday at 5 on The Word Out West.